really excited to be with you today for this installment of NPM's Thursday Thoughts. In particular, I'm going to be speaking today about the topic of engagement and specifically engaging young people. And this is something that's been important to me professionally and personally in my work with GIA publications, in my teaching career at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, my work with the One Call Institute. And I know that many of us, all of us really, who work in ministry and in education have these questions about what are the best ways to reach and engage young people, to empower and support young people, to involve them in our communities and in the life of the church. And so I want to be able to share some information through a generational research lens that might help you as you consider these questions for your communities, or at least, I predict, be able to help maybe identify opportunities or questions for you to consider as you move forward. So first of all, I want to begin by identifying, when we talk about quote unquote young people, who exactly are we talking about? So this is a list of generations alive and active today. And if you take a look at this list, the group of people that I'm going to be focusing primarily on are those who fall into the category that researchers refer to as Generation Z, those born between about 1995 and about 2010. So those about 10 years of age to about 25 years of age. And you can see where Generation Z falls in the timeline of other generations, again, active today. So I'll give you a second to look at this list, understanding that you might call these generations something different. You might understand the start and stop dates to be a little bit different. But I'm going to give you a second right now just to identify where you fall, your generation falls on this list. So the reason why I think it's important that we identify where we are on this list is because, of course, depending on where we fall, and again, this is a soft science, so these are general categories or general timelines, our experience can be understood in different ways. So when we think about the experience of age, really we're talking about age diversity. And I'm going to put up three different considerations: life cycle effect, period effect, and cohort effect, because the way we understand generations and how people who fall in generations, the similarities or differences in how we experience the world today, we're really talking about these sources of age diversity. So if you were a millennial, or if you were a Generation Y member, or you're a baby boomer generation member, the way you experience something today is going to differ from the way a member of Generation Z might experience something today because of these three effects. So let's start at the beginning. Life cycle effect. I'm going to go back and start the list over. Life cycle effect is the reality that young people differ from older people in this moment, but may resemble them later in life. So there's a commonality that's shared among people because we had, or at least at one point, occupied a similar point of the life cycle. For example, if you're talking to a 13-year-old today, you might be able to identify with their particular experience because at one point in your life, you too were 13 years of age, and there are some things about being 13 that are going to be common across generations, right? Now, the problem that oftentimes people run into in working with younger people is that this is where they stop. And they think that because I once was 13, I understand what it's like to be 13 today. And of course, we know that that's just not true, that things are more complex because we have period effects. We know that while I might be able to relate to what it's like being 13 today because I was once 13, there are also period effects. Major events affect people differently based upon location in the life cycle. So Right now, for example, with coronavirus, I, as someone who is a millennial, is going to experience this differently because of where I am in my life cycle and where I am in my generational experience than my parents who are boomers or my grandparents who are members of the silent generation. And I'm going to experience that differently, or the experience of this time, rather, is going to be felt differently by someone who is 13 today, who's a member of Generation Z. So again, major events affect people differently. So I can't assume that I understand fully the experience of a 13-year-old today because I'm experiencing period effects differently. Additionally, we have cohort effects. These period events and trends influence young adults as they're developing their core values. In other words, a cohort, this generation, is being developed as these periods, events, and trends influence development. So for me as a millennial, I came of age in the mid to late 90s when the internet was becoming ubiquitous, use of technology was becoming ubiquitous. And so that helped shape for my generation the trends, the values, the core values that really are the hallmarks of how we experience period effects and how we experience life cycle effects. So I spend time with these sources of age diversity again to suggest, as we're trying to identify what it's like to be a member of Generation Z, we have to go beyond just the simple initial port of call of, I know what it's like to be a teenager because I once was one, or I have raised some, and I need to dig deeper to understand how are cohort effects and period effects being felt, and how are they landing with a particular generation wherever they are in the life cycle, because that's the frame of reference I need to meet in my work with members of different generations. Now, I should mention here on this page before I move away that these things affect all members of all generations. So I'm talking specifically about young people, but this is the same lens and the same approach if I wanted to talk about people who are in their 30s or in their 70s or in their 90s. These types of considerations, life cycle, period, cohort, affect all people. We're just applying them in particular today to members of Generation Z. So knowing that, again, we need to consider how we reach younger people, how we reach members of a different generation by taking the perspective of the period, cohort, and life cycle trends that are happening right now with that group of people. Let's consider some of those trends. So when it comes to faith trends, we don't have time today to talk a lot about the studies and analyses that's been done, but I do want to share with you some sources of information you might consider in identifying the faith trends of younger people, Generation Z, millennials, people in a variety of generations. So I'm going to put this list here. After this video is over, you can go back, you can look at this list. If you're not familiar with these sources of information, I encourage you to go there. These are deep wells of information about the faith trends of people. Again, not just looking at these through life cycle, but also through period and cohort events and cohort effects. So I really encourage you to look at these. And you might be familiar with some of these already. A lot of these, for example, the St. Mary's Press Going, Gone study have been present at NPM, at LA Congress, at NCEA, and other conventions that you might have encountered them. I want to move beyond this to education trends, because this is something, as we think about engaging younger people in our communities, whether that's through faith formation, that's through ministerial formation. If you start to think about the trends and how they affect people today, you'll start to notice differences in the lived experience of younger people compared to perhaps your own generational lived experience. So if you consider education today for people in that Generation Z, think about what is true for them in their experience of education. And as you do so, think about what that means for what they expect, how they've been formed to expect as a consumer education and their experience to come across, right? So for young people today, school starts sooner and lasts longer. If I think about my grandfather, who's a member of the silent generation, he started school with first grade because that was the first grade. And when I think about my children today, by the time they get to first grade, they've had a year of kindergarten, 2 years of preschool, and then maybe 2 or more years of early childhood education. So in other words, formal education begins earlier and it lasts longer. It means that we have this delay in adolescence. It means we have a widening of this period of formation and of education that's different from previous generations. We also have the lived experience of standardization and curriculum aligned to assessment, meaning all of the work of education is done leading towards some sort of identified objective. In addition, there's collaborative education. Learners today, young people, are accustomed to needing to work together, learn from peers, share responsibility, collaborate in the way that they learn. Number 4, there is a student-centered education, meaning we identify in the field of education how an individual student learns, what their needs are, and then develop a program around, a customizable program really, around what that student needs. So there's an expectation of needs being served and of meeting students where they are. And then finally, in education today, technology is ubiquitous, right? A teacher is not a font of information, rather the interpreter of information. A student can find information, faster than someone can teach it to them because of the technology that is present. So this is the trend information. These are the period and cohort effects really for this particular generation when it comes to education. So what? What does this mean for us in ministry? If you look at this and you look at the experience of young people in education, where they spend most of their time and they spend most of their energies and efforts, what type of expectations do these realities build for younger people? And how then might they have those same expectations when it comes to their experience of their faith community? This is their lived experience. This is all they know. So how does that translate into the characteristics of this generation? Next, trend, and I'll answer those questions here in a minute, but I also want to talk about one other big category that affects us and the development of younger people, and that is parenting trends. So first, when it comes to parenting right now, the well-being of children has always been part of the national debate. For the entire time that the parents of Generation Z have been parenting, the nightly news, news magazines, 24-hour news cycles, news digests, parenting newsletters, blogs have all been focused on the well-being of children. In addition, there's always been this fear of the fact that we live in a very litigious society, right? We live in a society that is always concerned about the limits of liability and responsibility. And so if you take a consideration of these two things, parental issues, so I mean issues with parents, the fact that parenting can be a very insecure or doubtful reality. And I speak from experience here as the parent of 4 young children. I constantly am questioning, am I doing the right thing? Are the decisions I and my wife are making today about our children and the way we're raising them the best decisions or not? Right? Affects the way I parent in a more active manner. I'm constantly comparing the way we parent to the way other people parent. I'm constantly thinking about, my children, and are we setting them up to compete against all these other children that I see and the other parents that I speak with, right? This causes the reality of perhaps helicopter parenting or stealth fighter parenting, which if you've ever been a teacher or an administrator, you know what stealth fighter means as opposed to helicopter. So all of these trends when it comes to parenting also help shape the reality and the lived experience of younger people today, and should be something that we are aware of in ministry so we know how to intersect with these realities and how we reach out to younger people. So again, education trends, parenting trends, some of the faith trends you already know, all conspire to shape this generational identity. Again, cohort, period, life cycle effects. All of these things come together to mean again, in a general way, members of Generation Z are used to finding what they need instantaneously. Again, that's how they're taught. That's how they're raised. So when it comes to our faith communities, what does that mean for information? If there's a young person or their parent who wants information about a program or wants information about a practice or an opportunity for involvement, can they get information immediately? Because if they can't get information immediately from us, they're accustomed to finding it immediately elsewhere. So if I have to call 5 people or click through 5 links on your parish website or wait for an informational meeting to be scheduled in the coming months, that's not going to cut it. Second, if I have a question, I go for the answer. If I'm a member of Generation Z, the way they've been taught has been find an answer. Yes, ask questions, then go and find that information. Answers are always at their fingertips. Again, this is the technology generation. This is the independent thinker, independent learner generation. Similarly, I have a question. When is choir practice? Where do I go for information about confirmation? How do I get involved in this volunteer opportunity? I'm accustomed to finding the information immediately, and I'm accustomed to finding the information on my own. Are the answers to those questions available in a variety of formats through your parish in a way that people can find them quickly? I'm used to using the internet to research options and reference others, but I am an independent thinker. So just because I find information on the internet doesn't mean that Generation Z succumbs to herd mentality. I am a critical thinker, but I will use the internet to find opinions and options and reference other things. So knowing that that is there, again, how does your community or your school or your program provide information? How do you engage with the reality that members of this generation do think independently? Preparing early, this is something that I think we have a long way to go in the church. Delayed adolescence, as I mentioned at the beginning for some of these trends, means that earlier, students are encountering bigger ideas. I think about my second grader, my kindergartner, my preschooler. They are all working with ideas that seem to be bigger ideas earlier. But also in high school, more and more high schools are offering advanced and college level classes. So younger students in high school are also being asked to think more critically. Have our faith formation programs kept pace? Do we offer to 15, 16, 17-year-olds in our communities advanced, in-depth programs of study when it comes to theology and spirituality? The students in our faith formation and liturgical formation programs are in calculus, they're in philosophy, they're in critical literature courses, they're in advanced language courses. Do they get dumbed down or watered down information when it comes to our faith formation, religious, liturgical formation experiences? Right? Raised in a culture of fear, this is the generation that is used to there being, unfortunately, news about school shootings, used to there being news about domestic and global terrorism. Now, that means that we are dealing with a generation that is looking for safety and security and hope, right? This also means that we are dealing with a generation of students and young people who are pretty sophisticated in terms of their emotional intelligence and their emotional experience. How do we acknowledge that depth, and how do we also not assume because someone is 15, their feelings are limited, right? So again, here are the outcomes from the reality of the trends of faith development, of education development, of parental development and experience. These have significant impact on the practice of our communities. If we can't provide information instantly, if we don't provide information digitally, if we don't provide sophisticated information, it is not going to keep pace with the experience of members of this generation. Further, some other characteristics in general. These are curious and well-informed individuals, self-learners who are entrepreneurial, collaborative learners who are able to work with others, but also able to work independently. They are cautious and realistic. They are the most diverse and tolerant group or generation that has ever been studied. They are future focused, which makes sense given their age and where they are in their overall life cycle. And they work for success. There's a typo here. Instead of word for success, it should be work for success. So as you look at this list, think about what this means for engagement. You have curious or well-informed individuals who are accustomed to finding answers and being able to search and navigate the minefield of questions. So as opposed to having answers for young people, there's a way to engage young people in helping you find answers and solutions. They're entrepreneurial. Instead of having to have a program that's snappy and finalized, there's an opportunity to engage the entrepreneurial and curious spirit of young people to help build programs. Right? The collaboration and independence here is really exciting. These are all characteristics that are bent towards problem solving, solution building, that are all bent towards finding ways that meaningfully create opportunities and solutions for people in our communities. And that in particular is really exciting. So again, as we think about these trends and what that means on the imprint of period and cohort realities for Generation Z, for younger people, if you look at that compared to other generations, you can see the multitasking, pragmatic, utilitarian, active, DIY nature of this generation can complement well the realities for or the experience of other generations at work in our communities. So what does this mean for opportunities for pastoral ministry in our parishes and in our schools? I want to present some ideas for engaging Generation Z and then some questions I think all of us should be asking ourselves. First, to engage Generation Z, we have to have a relationship both online and in person. Generation Z values online engagement because they're accustomed to it. Every other reality that they engage with, from education to the way they engage with their peers, the way they engage with popular culture, is online, but they also exist beyond online. They value and prize interpersonal relationships very much. So we can't sell them short and just assume they're a social media generation. Yeah, they're active in social media because that's what they're accustomed to, but they very much value and hunger for in-person, meaningful communication also. We need to be present where they are interacting. That can be scary for us. Yes, we have to be involved in social media, but also the social media platforms like Instagram and Snapchat, where young people are involved. We need to be there. We need to be present in the physical places where they interact in order to be within the sphere of relevance that this generation has created. We need to educate younger people for the purpose and value of what we're asking them to do. Meaning, young people will commit, the generational research demonstrates, members of Generation Z will commit to something bigger than themselves. That's what they want, but they need to know what that is so that they can commit to it. Now, this is where generational differences can sometimes turn people off. A younger person will ask, why would I do this? Why is this important? An older generation member might hear that as being antagonistic, might view that as being pessimistic. But really, a younger person is asking, what is it you're asking me to invest in so I can understand and go whole hog? So we have to educate for purpose. Don't just invite to canter. Invite to canter in a way that demonstrates the ministerial importance of the cantor in the life of the community. And then you've got this young person. We have to demonstrate interest and investment in their skills. So not just invite to cantor because it's important in the life of the community. And I see in you, John, I see in you, Jennifer, this is the skill you have to bring to this ministerial role. We need to have that type of interest and investment. We need to know them as individuals. We need to talk about what that means for their future. We need to communicate hope, and we need to be authentic, utilizing mentorship, helping them interpret the information they're finding within the context of a team. So all of this means the approach we need to take, we need to understand the people we are approaching. We need to explain to them what we're approaching them for, why that has value, what that means for them, the community, and how we see them playing a role within this team. So that's a different lens than just saying it's in the bulletin that if there's a kid who plays clarinet, they can come and play with our music ministry, and I hope they respond. That's not what this generation is built for. This generation is built for invitation. This generation is built for personalized invitation. And if we can do that, we've got them. But that is not the structure that many of our programs are built for. So, critical questions. Final thing, critical questions. Do you engage directly and meaningfully with skills, hobby, and gifts? In other words, are you able to directly and meaningfully engage with the skills, hobbies, and gifts of individual young people in your community? Do you know them? Do you know their names? Do you know how to reach them? Do you know what those hobbies, skills, and gifts are? If not, you need to know what they are for this invitation. Does your community provide mentoring or coaching? If you want to be able to develop a program or structure right now for members of your community that will have meaningful impact, develop a mentoring or coaching program in your community. It will pay dividends, especially with this generation and frankly, with all generations. We all want to be mentored and coached. If you want to do something, provide an opportunity for people to form or learn or have conversation while we're socially distanced, number 2 on this list should be it. Do you provide immediate engagement and participation in actual work? Do not respond to a young person who expresses interest. Wonderful. I'd love for you to be a cantor. We train cantors in October. Come back then. You will lose them. You need to train them now. You need to involve them in work now. While we're distanced, you want to have a kid involved who's a real go-getter in developing something, a social media program or outreach for your choir. Let them do it now. Don't tell them, great, wait a couple months and we'll get back together, or you will have lost them. It needs to be immediate in some way where there's actual work you are involving them in doing. Don't do work at them, involve them in work. Do you provide ongoing development? Is there one formation session and that's it? That's not going to cut it for a generation who is accustomed to constant, meaningful learning, advanced learning, and development. Is there flexibility for new ideas, initiatives, and creativity? If someone comes and says, I have a great idea for how we might use technology to get this, the music for the next couple of weekends out to members of our choir. Are you open to that? New ideas for how we might do a new program to reach people within our community, new ideas of how we might use a platform within reason within our community. Are you open to that? And if it's a matter of younger people fitting into the structure you have now, you really need to consider what that looks like, because we will lose people. The classic example I give of this is you have established rehearsal times. You have established times that you have to work with your musicians. Is there flexibility with how you might bend that a little to accommodate the involvement of a younger person who is involved in a bunch of other things? If they can't be there at 7 on Monday, is there a way that you can flex that a little bit to still get them to be involved? Because if we say no, they will move on to something else. They're used to immediate engagement. And if we can't provide it, they will find it somewhere else. And we need it to be within the church. And finally, 1 through 5. Engaging meaningfully, providing mentoring, immediate engagement, ongoing development, and flexibility. Can you find answers to 1 through 5 in your budget? I know this is a difficult reality, especially for times right now when we have additional financial strain in our communities. But we need to be able, what number 6 gets at to, whether it's financial resources or otherwise, is your community willing to put time and talent, if not treasure, into providing answers for 1 through 5 for the sake of meaningfully engaging members of Generation Z. If not, you really need to reconsider thoughtfully and prayerfully answers. Now, I know that I rushed through a whole bunch of generational theory in this very short presentation. This was meant to get your feet wet, and it feels like perhaps it was drinking out of a fire hose or a big splash, and I understand that. There are all kinds of sources that you can go to for information. I encourage you to check out the One Call Institute, where we thoughtfully unpack a lot of this research in a hands-on way for communities. Please feel free to contact me, mattar@giamusic.com, anytime. I'm happy to send more information. Please keep your eyes out for more formational opportunities like this that can be helpful for you or for your community. I'm more than happy, again, to answer questions. The important thing is that we understand that there are different factors that affect young people today, that we can't just assume we know what their lives are like because we were their age once too. It doesn't honor their life experience or the contributions that they can make to our communities. We have to make space now. We have to thoughtfully and thankfully and authentically receive the contributions they can make to their community. And if we can do that, we have a powerful opportunity to not only provide space for young people in our church, but for our churches to benefit from the richness that young people can provide. Again, please feel free to contact me. God bless you. Thank you for all of the work you are doing in your communities day in and day out. It goes a long way, and I know it's appreciated. Thanks for listening. And again, I look forward to your questions.